And first I am going to talk about how and why we founded the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and then get a little bit more into why we all need freedom from religions, which is the official topic of my talk. And on my mother's side of the family, I'm a third-generation freethinker. I wonder how many of you were raised without religion. Can I get a show of hands? So quite a few. So it's kind of nice, isn't it? And my parents were very committed to this fact of honoring the conscience of their small children, that we were a captive audience and we should not be contaminated with abstractions that we couldn't begin to understand as small tots, such as original sin, hell, and even some of the nicer, more benign concepts of religion until we were old enough to contemplate abstractions. And I believe the same. I think it's terribly important that children be allowed to grow up free from religion. And I like to say that I was like a secular Pippa, if you know the Browning poem, God wasn't in his heaven and all was right with my world. But in fact, I was born in the mid-50s. I'm going to divulge my age. And unbeknownst to me, there was a lot going wrong in Congress when it came to religion. We had a great deal of harm being inflicted on our secular form of government. We had under God being wedged into the Pledge of Allegiance. We had In God We Trust adopted as a motto and forced on all our coins and currency. We had the National Day of Prayer law passed, the parish exemption or the housing allowance, where clergy are given a phenomenal discount by the IRS. And even things like 10 Commandments plopped all over our government spaces, and that was a campaign led by Cecil B. DeMille. It was basically an advertisement for his god-awful epic, the 10 Commandments. And that was in cahoots with a Minnesota judge you probably heard of, Judge Rugemeyer, who was with the Eagles. And he wanted to promote the Bible and Minnesota granite. And so we have a lot of violations to undo just from the decade that I was born in. And I feel like I've spent most of my life trying to undo them. My mother, Laurie Gaylor, was an early feminist and abortion rights activist, and I was a middle schooler following her around in the late 60s and early 70s when she was crusading for women's rights, and we realized that there were other ways that all was not right with our world, that women were dying or suffering needlessly due to the control that religion had over our bodies and over our reproductive law. And seeing that organized religion was the principal enemy of women's rights opened our eyes to the harm of religion ever being inflicted on women through our civil and secular laws. And so we realized it was time to restore some respect for the constitutional wall of separation between church and state, and for that entirely godless and secular constitution. And while it was abortion rights that happened to open our eyes, it could have been something else. It could have been creationism or gay rights or something like that. But in our case, we became persuaded that for women to be free, dogma should never be enshrined in our laws, and for society to be free, that was also necessary. And so as a 21-year-old college student in 1976, I joined my mother in co-founding the Freedom from Religion Foundation. The issue that came up was prayer before our Madison City Council and our county board. And we thought if we went in there as a mother-daughter team only, that would seem a little weak, and that we should say we belong to a group. And we had been thinking a great deal about the concept of religious liberty, that there's no freedom from religion, that there's respect for freedom of religion, but in fact you need freedom from religion equally to have religious liberty, that this is also a principle in our Establishment Clause. So we thought, well, freedom from religion will add foundation, that's alliterative, that will sound powerful. And we went before the Madison City Council and the county board, and we made the front pages, and one of the news reporters predicted that there would be a snowball's chance in hell that we would succeed in getting rid of prayer at the Madison City Council. But guess what? It took a year, but we prevailed, and reason and the Constitution prevailed, and that's pretty much, in a nutshell, the purposes of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And people read about us and wanted to join, And pretty soon there we had ourselves a group. And it was the bicentennial in 1976 of the secular constitution, so that was kind of a nice way to begin it. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation does have two purposes. We work to educate the public about non-theism, and we work to keep religion out of government. And we have been dogged. I guess the thorn in our side is that governmental prayer has continued to be a theme for the last 40 years in terms of the work that we do. And when it comes to our work, about half of the legal complaints that we deal with are religion in the public schools, where we can often fail because the law's on our side. But in terms of governmental prayer, it's gone from kind of out of the frying pan into the fire with the Supreme Court's decision 2 years ago in the Greece case. So you may have heard about the Freedom from Religion Foundation's contest, the Nothing Fails Like Prayer award that we give. We'll fly you to our convention so you can give a secular invocation. If you give a secular invocation to your county or to your city council, they allow that kind of prayer. So we're trying to fight fire with fire. And one of the things that I did in the early days about prayer was stopping benedictions and invocations at my alma mater. I was a sophomore at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and became aware that they had been praying at the graduation ceremonies for 144 years. And so I complained about it, and I stopped it, and we don't have them anymore. And it was one of the easiest victories that we had. We had a very sympathetic senior class officer group, and we had a very sympathetic chancellor, and I think that gave me an unrealistic idea of how easy it would be to combat religion and government. But there were similar victories like that, and in 1978 my mother was asked to go national with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, so there would be another voice for free thought nationally. And so to fast forward, it's gone from the original 2 of us to over 24,000 members in North America, from all volunteer to full-time staff of 21, plus part-timers and interns. And Dan Barker, who's with me, my husband, first joined FFRF in 1984, but we kind of considered him an honorary founder because when he became our public relations director, he really helped grow FFRF. And today he is co-president with me. And he's a former evangelical minister, and so he's also co-founder of the Clergy Project with Richard Dawkins and Dan Dennett, which you may have heard of. There's about 600 participants, mostly former clergy, acting as support for ministers and pastors and priests and a few imams and even a nun or two who find themselves in the pulpit or in religion and they've lost their faith and need a way to get out. And so also I want to point out to what we have just, the little preview that we saw, that actually there is a lot of free thought music. Dan's composed a lot of it, uncovered a lot of it, and he also has uncovered the fact that many of the classical musicians and many of the composers of the great American songbook, we're talking Rogers, Cole Porter, Yip Harburg, who wrote Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Stephen Sondheim, are atheists. And we can look at many of the classical composers as well. So there's a lot of atheist music out there. And he's also written books from his unique perspective, and we have some of his books here today. We have some other items, some of the books I've written about women in the Bible and women in free thought. Longtime members will know that my mother, Anne, died last year at 88 after a near lifetime of working for free thought and for feminism, and not only the Freedom from Religion Foundation, but the Women's Medical Fund carries on. And I wanted to briefly talk about the Women's Medical Fund because atheists do start charities, and that was the charity that was co-founded by my mother and also Professor Bob West, who's an atheist. And we have a mostly atheist board, and it's considered to be the longest-lived, continuously operating abortion rights charity in the nation. And it helps primarily women in Wisconsin. And we've helped about 25,000 women pay, indigent women pay for abortions. And there should be no need for the Women's Medical Fund or similar organizations It's the cutoff of funding for abortions under the Congressional Hyde Amendment, named for Henry Hyde, a Catholic who believed that life begins at conception, therefore abortion is a sin, and the cutoff in 36 states, including Wisconsin. And by the way, the Women's Medical Fund, and I'm now co-administrator of it, and we take the calls every day, works with Dr. Mildred Hansen here in Duluth for women in northern Wisconsin who can't get down to Madison or Milwaukee. And it's a pure charity. The money all just goes to pay for abortions. It's all volunteer. And so that was a digression, but in the past 40 years, the Freedom from Religion Foundation has probably brought about 75 lawsuits. I meant to count them before I came here today, but it's close. Challenging religious privilege and state church entanglements. And we have 5 staff attorneys working for us today. We also have added 2 legal fellows, which are 2-year fellowships that are paid. And then we have a variety of interns. And this past summer, we've had 6 legal interns. And they try to end violations without our having to go to court, but when the circumstances merit it and we have the right set of plaintiffs, etc., we of course have to sue. And we also have a weekly radio show, Free Thought Radio, that's also a podcast. And our newspaper, Free Thought Today, and we have a bunch of copies over there if you haven't got yours. And the good news that I bring is that in the United States today, there have never been more of us, more freethinkers, more non-religious. Pew shows that almost 1 in 4 adult citizens considers themselves non-religious, is part of the nuns, as in none of the above, and 1/3 of millennials are non-religious, and we hope that they'll stay that way. And so I like to say it's the best of times to be a freethinker. We have our I'm Secular Vote campaign that you might have read about, or I'm an Atheist and I Vote. We've done ads at the Democratic National Convention. We've done ads in D.C., and we have buttons that are there free for you, trying to point out to politicians that they should be wooing us. We have done surveys that show that 97% of our members are registered voters, and that's, typically 77% of Americans are registered, so that's huge. And our membership seculars are voters and readers, and they're plugged in, and yet no politicians woo us, and why is that? And I'm sure you're aware that atheism and non-belief is still considered the kiss of death in politics, and it's not just by the religious right kinds of politicians, but we were reminded 2 weeks ago of our lowly status when that controversy erupted with the DNC, where it was revealed that some DNC officials had tried to atheist bait Bernie Sanders. And that was bad enough, and then Bernie Sanders went on national TV and said he wasn't an atheist, and it was outrageous to call him an atheist instead of saying it's outrageous to atheist bait. And so that was kind of pity. And so we do know that we are very low on the social totem pole when it comes to acceptance. And here in Minnesota, you have the University of Minnesota did a major study, a longitudinal study of attitudes toward outgroups. And they looked at, from the 1960s until 2006, they looked at social acceptance of gays, blacks, women, Muslims, Arabs, women are an outgroup, and they found that everybody had made enormous strides in social acceptance except for one group. You want to guess what that group was? Atheists. We were the people that you would least like your children to marry. We were prostitutes. We're in prison. These absurd stereotypes. And I asked Penny Edgell, the researcher, how do people have these ridiculous stereotypes? And she said that's because many people have never knowingly met an atheist. They have met you, they just didn't know you were an atheist. And so that's when the Freedom from Religion Foundation started our OUT campaign. And so the I'm Secular and I Vote is kind of a continuation of that. That if it is safe for you to identify yourself as a non-believer, it's very helpful for the movement. It's what the gay movement did, and that's what we need to do. And I'm sure, speaking of elections, that you're aware that you're not really voting for the next president. You're really voting for the next Supreme Court justice, the replacement for Justice Scalia, and some other future replacements. And we have 5 remaining Catholics on the U.S. Supreme Court, and 4 of them are ultra-right-wing and vote as a bloc. So it has been the best of times to be a freethinker in terms of the movement, but one of the worst of times to be in the courts. And so I'm very hopeful that we will see some respect for the Establishment Clause in the upcoming new Supreme Court. It's a very important chance to change the law. FFRF typically has about 10 lawsuits ongoing, and this year, I think we've got about 15 because in this year alone we've already filed 8 new lawsuits, and we've already won 2 of them. And one of those was Brewster County, Texas, where the sheriff decided to put Christian crosses on the back of his law enforcement vehicles, sending quite a chilling message of theocracy. You can imagine if you were a non-believer with a bumper sticker, how you'd feel. And he vowed that he would never back down, and the governor of Texas, Abbott, vowed that he would never be told he had to remove those. But guess what? They capitulated, and they're down. And actually, they were taken down about 10 days after we filed our lawsuit. And then we also filed and won a case in California, Antelope Valley School District, where they were publicizing student essay or scholarship opportunities for high schoolers, for religious high schoolers, but they denied us the right to publicize our high school competition. We have 4 competitions for students, one of the most important things we do. And so they capitulated shortly after we filed our federal lawsuit as well. Then our biggest new lawsuit ongoing is Barker versus the House Chaplain. And you may be aware that Congress opens with prayers, both in the House and the Senate. We spend about $850,000 a year paying those 2 chaplains. One of them is a priest in the House, and they have an unspoken or unwritten rule that members of the House can ask for a minister in their district, or somebody who's got an ordination, to give a guest invocation. And that is typically allowed, and sometimes they don't even have to have invocations. But we went to the priest chaplain of the House and asked for the right for Dan, who has an ordination, to give a secular invocation, and we were very specifically denied. It took about, it was over the course of more than a year. And after waiting for more than a year, the chaplain sent a very insulting letter saying he didn't really think that Representative Mark Pocan, who was sponsoring Dan, and Dan were serious in asking for this right. So we have that lawsuit ongoing. We think that the House of Representatives should be representative. There has never been an atheist or non-religious invocation to open a Congress. There's been Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, a few others thrown in there, but never allowing us. And next week, we're going to be filing a new lawsuit in Lehigh County, Pennsylvania, where there is a cross in a church drawn on the motto of the county, Christian cross. And we've been trying to get that removed for about 3 years, and now we feel we have to go to court. And so then we have many other actions since we work to promote free thought, and we just completed FFRF's first public works project with about 256 donors, including from Canada and Puerto Rico. The Freedom from Religion Foundation raised all the funds to restore a statue to Robert Greene Ingersoll in Peoria. And Peoria, Illinois is where the most famous 19th century infidel and orator got his start and made his name. Robert Ingersoll lived for about 20 years in Peoria, and the only public statue to him is in Glen Oak Park in Peoria, and it came to our attention that it was in terrible disrepair. It was put up in 1911, and when they put this statue up, he died in 1899, and he was so well-known and beloved that 6,000 people attended the dedication for that ceremony. The New York Times was there. It was huge. I don't think we're going to have that many people for the dedication of the restoration of the statue, but that's going to take place this week, Thursday, on his birthday, August 11th. And we're going to be holding a dinner party before that. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it. It looks beautiful. And of course, Ingersoll said all religions are inconsistent with mental freedom. One world at a time, he advised, and he said that hands that help are better far than lips that pray. We also have given $50,000 for a new statue to be put up in Ray County, Tennessee, which is the home of the Scopes trial, Dayton, Tennessee. Several years ago, they put up a statue of William Jennings Bryan on one side of the courthouse where they held the Scopes trial. Nothing for Clarence Darrow, so that's going to be a private enterprise, and we've already, as I said, given $50,000, and that's an ongoing project. And we also just finished an expansion of our own building because we didn't have space for all our staff, and that was with so many generous donors around the country. And we have an auditorium and a library. We have a replica of Mr. Darwin made out of silicone that's completely lifelike, and it's a photo op if you ever come to visit. And we have lots of other little things there, so please do come visit us. But since we've gotten that taken care of, we feel that we were able to do things we didn't have the wherewithal to do in the past. And one of them is to branch out and create an entity called Non-Belief Relief. And over the years, there's been quite a debate in the free thought movement. There have been members of our group who said, we non-theists should give to charity as a group because we have such bad reputation, because we don't get any credit for our charity, whereas there's an infrastructure with churches where they're always being given credit even when taxpayers get the bill. And we've always said, well, FFF has two very strict purposes. But so we became aware that if we started our own charity, and it's a different entity, it's going to have its own tax exemption called Non-Belief Relief, that we could kill two birds with one stone. We could be very helpful in a world that needs a great deal of help. And we could also challenge the IRS clergy prerogatives and privileges which say that churches and church-related charities are exempt from filing the Form 990 tax return that the rest of us have to file, which is very onerous. It costs FFRF $1,400 alone in CPA funds. It's like 33 pages, very complicated, and it's in a way to account to the IRS and to the public for what we do with our money so that we can prove that we should remain tax exempt. Churches don't have to do that. Church charities don't have to do that. That's how Jim Jones amassed that fortune of guns and children and money, and Diana happened. It wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been accountable. So we really think this is a big issue. So we couldn't afford to endanger tax-exempt donations to FFRF by suing on our behalf. So we've created this other entity, Non-Belief Relief, and we're going to do two things. We're going to give to charity, and we're going to challenge the IRS's prerogatives. And so we've done things like, the idea is that if there's a natural disaster, hopefully Non-Belief Relief will be listed in your newspaper under groups that you can contribute to. We've given $10,000 to the Human Compassion Fund for the victims of Orlando, where the money goes just to the families and survivors of the shooting directly. We've given scholarships to Camp Quest, projects for the homeless, quite a bit of money to the UN World Food Program in the name of non-believers in Syria and Sudan, for example. But we also have a special provision there that Non-Belief Relief is looking at helping individuals around the world who are targeted for their non-belief, for blasphemy, apostasy, whose lives are endangered. And this is happening increasingly, and we've been concentrating on the Bangladeshi bloggers, where you may know there's been about 60 of them put to death in the last 5 years, and in the last year or so it's been about 8. And the modus operandi is to go up to an unknown atheist on the streets with 3 men with machetes from behind, and they slash them to death. And one of them was Abhijit Roy, who's an American citizen but born in Bangladesh, and he was there a year ago in February with his wife, Rafida Bonia Ahmed, and they were at a book fair, and he has been agitating against theocracy, and they attacked him and killed him on the streets, and they attacked Bona, and somehow she lived. And I met her, and she had me feel the back of her skull, and you can feel the machete marks. And she lost her thumb. And she's kind of continuing her husband's work, and she's going to be speaking at the Freedom from Religion Foundation's convention in Pittsburgh on the weekend of October 7th and 8th, by the way. Lawrence Krauss, and joining Jerry Coyne and Susan Jacoby and a bunch of activists. But she's going to talk about the situation there and what happened to her and her husband. And it's very chilling. And so we're working with a loose network, Center for Inquiry and the Freedom House and people in Ireland, and we vet the bloggers very carefully to make sure that they're genuine, the people that are known, and we help them get out. And Non-Belief Relief has helped about 10 bloggers, and most recently it was a family, a man who was at the top of the list, and he was a professional man, his wife's professional, they have 2 children, and they had to get out so quickly that they were sent to Nepal. Bona helped arrange to send them to Nepal, and they were living in great privation. They had a permit for a year to stay there. Water, it took a mile and walk to water. They had electricity for 3 hours a day. They almost lost one of their children because there wasn't health care. And then their permit ended and they were going to get fined, and so we helped fly them to Sri Lanka, where they can be there for 24 months and hopefully make some inroads. But nobody wants the Bangladesh bloggers, and it's very hard for them to get permanent visas. And so it's a real dilemma, and we think this is going to be happening more and more, not just in Bangladesh, but in other countries, other Islamist countries, and where people are being executed and persecuted or jailed simply for espousing what 75 million of us around the world believe, that there is no God. And so we think that's very important. And then that leads me to my final story. It's not quite as dramatic, but it still shows, we think, why there should be no entanglement between religion and government. And I want to talk about this lawsuit that we won last year in Georgia. It concerned a family that was living in the heart of the Bible Belt in Swainsboro, Georgia, which has a population of about 7,600. It's about 75 miles from Atlanta. I never heard of it, but they bill themselves as one of Georgia's most charming cities. But they had a very uncharming habit of inflicting prayer on children on a daily basis in their public schools. And we sued in a public school district named Emmanuel County, and you may know that was very appropriate for prayer because Emmanuel means God with us, and this was a very godly community. And in August of 2014, a little child named Jamie, and I'm going to use pseudonyms, we still are protecting their identity, started kindergarten at Swainsboro Primary School, and every day before lunch, Jamie's teacher asked Jamie and the other 5-year-olds to fold their hands and pray, and she led the class in a call and response prayer. God our Father, we give thanks for our many blessings. Amen. Meanwhile, Jamie's first grade sibling, Jessie, was also subjected all semester long to pressure to pray. And in Jessie's first grade class, the teacher led Jessie and the other students in a daily prayer, and their prayer was, God is great, God is good, thank you for our food, thank you for our daily prayer, thank you, amen. So the parents of Jamie and Jessie were naturally outraged and shocked, and they contacted the principal immediately to object to the prayers, and the principal said nobody's ever complained. And instead of stopping the prayer, instead the teachers sent these 2 small children out of their classroom into the hallway during every prayer, every day. And naturally, this turned them into social pariahs. Jessie, the first grader, reported that the teacher had used her mean voice when instructing Jessie to wait in the hall. Jamie's teacher announced to the entire class that Jamie wasn't allowed to pray to God. And that resulted in Jamie, the kindergartner, being teased. The teacher also announced that Jessie, the first grader, wouldn't be reciting the Pledge of Allegiance because it contained the words under God, even though their parents had not complained about the pledge. They were doing one thing at a time. And so, of course, this led to further ostracism. So the parents contacted us, and we wrote a very good letter. The law is completely with us. There's more than half a century of firm Supreme Court precedent against devotions and proselytizing in public schools, but the school ignored us. And by the end of the first semester, the parents ended up withdrawing the kindergartner from kindergarten because he was so traumatized. And this was a real burden for the mother. She had 3 smaller children at home. And meanwhile, the first grader was getting escalating pressure. The first grader had a science teacher encouraging Jessie to make a good decision regarding prayer in the classroom. The physical education teacher asked her to begin praying. The teacher held Jessie back from recess, her classroom teacher, to talk about the teacher's personal views about God, saying that God loved Jessie and God made the world, and indicating that Jessie's mother was a bad person for not believing in God. So after 4.5 months of unrelenting pressure, Jessie gave in and began participating in classroom prayers, which is very sad, isn't it? And it's at that point that we and the family sued. And it should not have been necessary for us to sue over such an obvious violation. But that lawsuit was the only way to protect the freedom of conscience of these young children and to get the school to toe the line. And they did almost immediately capitulate after our lawsuit. They let the 2 lead teachers go quietly, but the children and their parents suffered, and they actually moved across, understandably, they moved across the country after the lawsuit was over. They couldn't stay in that town. So there are unfortunately chronic violations in schools throughout not just the South, but the nation, and we have a sort of similar situation in Indiana. There's a half-century violation where they make the kids enact the nativity. These are middle school and high schoolers in the chorus and the band, enact the nativity during the annual Christmas Spectacular concert. It takes 20 minutes for them to enact the nativity while a teacher reads from 3 different passages of the New Testament. And they couldn't stop when we wrote our letter. And so we have an ongoing lawsuit. And there, the whole town is speculating on Facebook and Twitter and in the halls of the school, who is the family? We know who you are. The mother's been followed home from work. She works at a religious school. The dad, somebody stood up during a concert and pointed out to him and said he's the father. The son has been picked on, but they've remained anonymous. We haven't divulged who they are. But our attorney, one of our staff attorneys, got a death threat both for himself and for the family, which named the family and was posted near the Indiana town, and said that when they least expected it, they were all going to be killed, our attorney and the family, and end up in the Indiana River in that town. So that was pretty frightening, and it was really very gratifying that after this death threat was publicized, 2 other families joined our lawsuit so that they would have some company. And we do expect to win, but we do expect it's going to be a fight. They're not capitulating. So we know that religion in public schools creates walls between children. It accentuates differences that the children never knew about. And what happens in public schools in the United States when religion enters it is like a microcosm of what happens in societies around the world when the government favors one religion over another or religion over non-religion. As my mother has always pointed out, there can be no true religious liberty without the freedom to dissent. And you do not have that freedom when you have religion in government. When the government endorses or supports or approves religion, it's always the majority that will be favored and the minority that is turned into outsiders and who will be scapegoated or persecuted. So the answer is to disestablish religion from government, to place all of us, whether we're religious or non-religious, majority or minority, on equal footing, and leaving the business of religion entirely out of government. And I know that I am preaching to the deconverted. We at FFRF receive a steady supply of hate emails and crank mail, most of it demanding that we go live someplace else. If we complain about Christianity in our government, we're usually told to go to some Islamist nation. So these haters not only have terrible grammar and spelling, but a terrible grasp of logic. They just don't get it. You know, they think if we complain about Christian intrusions in our government, that means we embrace Sharia or Sharia. So we get obscene phone calls, we get the occasional death threats that we have to take seriously. Some of them we don't have to. We take security seriously in our new building. And what's interesting to me is that threats almost always come not because of our atheist espousal or free thought espousal, but because of our work to keep religion out of government. And I think that's kind of chilling. And as we've noted, there's been this unprecedented attack of non-theism worldwide. Charlie Hebdo, the Copenhagen attack, Paris, Nice, Orlando, Baghdad, just piling up, the Istanbul airports, bloggers in Bangladesh, as I mentioned, and they're also going after gays there now. There are these 13 nations where you can technically be put to death for espousing atheism. And of course, these random terrorist attacks put all of us theoretically at risk now. So religion always makes conflict worse. Just as it creates walls between school children, it creates walls between people within nations and between nations. When people are indoctrinated to believe in a God, the most powerful weapon or pronouncement is, God is on our side, not yours. God tells me women are inferior and must submit. God tells me if you don't believe exactly as I do and do exactly as I say, you deserve to be punished in this world and eternally. So I think the number one sin of religion is placing dogma above humanity, and when that happens, watch out. Hell doesn't exist, but that doesn't mean that some religionists are not doing their best to turn our world into one. And it's such a pity when we could have a paradise here on earth. And I like to say that the only afterlife that should concern any of us is leading a world that is secure for our descendants. A pleasant world, I hope. As Ruth Green said, and she wrote the Born Again Skeptic's Guide to the Bible, freedom depends on freethinkers. So I'd like to conclude with a few thoughts about how you can make a difference. You probably are already making a difference, and these are minor things, but they work. First, come out of the closet if you can. As pointed out in that research by Penny Edgell, many Americans have never knowingly met a non-believer. And second, never let a religious lie or myth, disinformation, such as that this is a Christian nation, or that there's a God in our Constitution, or that George Washington prayed at Valley Forge, never let those myths or lies go uncorrected. Those letters to the editor are really very important. And third, make a fuss if you encounter a violation, a separation between religion and government, and the Freedom from Religion Foundation would be very glad to back you up, and we'll try to end that violation. And so I'd like to just conclude in honor of Robert Ingersoll's upcoming birthday. I'd like to quote some lines from his poem, The Declaration of the Free. The hands that help are better far than lips that pray. Love is the ever-gleaming star that leads the way, that shines not on made worlds of bliss, but on a paradise in bliss. There's a lot of questions or comments from this crowd. Are you all in stunned silence?
I'll walk around with the microphone like Oprah, and you've experienced that. You can see them on Oprah. You could help.
We have a huge overpopulation problem in the world, and I think religion has a lot to do with that. It seems to me 20 years ago or so there was a population summit in Cairo, I think, that the Roman Catholic Church kind of squashed. Could you remind us about what happened at the population summit?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly the details, but the Roman Catholic Church is always in cahoots with the Islamist nations at these various world summits and UN summits, trying to make us go backwards instead of forwards. And I do think that overpopulation, you never hear anyone talk about it anymore, not even Paul Ehrlich, and it is a huge threat. And it's almost a direct, it's not completely at the, we can't completely blame the Catholic Church, but it certainly has more than its share of blame coming to it for its ridiculous and barbaric provisions against birth control and abortion. And the current Pope is kind of a conundrum, but he really hasn't altered any dogma yet.
Amy, Laurie, thank you very much for a wonderful talk. Continuing with comments on Pope Francis, many of us find the recent encyclical very satisfying in the sense that it addresses problems that the Church has failed to address for perhaps a millennia or two, particularly the inequities inherent in our economic systems. Anyway, I would be interested in how Freedom from Religion Foundation thinks about or advocates for interaction with religious dogma that we happen to align with or agree with. In other words, freedom from religion doesn't mean that we lose the presence of religion in our culture. And in some cases, we might find common cause, and I appreciate your comments.
Well, I was very disappointed in the Pope's, I don't know if it was an encyclical on global warming, climate change, because I thought that the root cause of climate change and global warming is overpopulation. So he just didn't address it. There's that sanity test. You put somebody in a room and the faucet's on and it's overflowing and flooding the room, and there's a mop there, and you see, do they start mopping or do they turn off the faucet? So I don't think the Catholic Church passes the sanity test. But yes, I think the current Pope is, like I said, he's kind of an interesting conundrum. He's saying a lot of the right things, but is he just a pretty face? Is he window dressing to bring people back into the fold? But I do think that, of course, we want to work with anybody that's trying to make the world better. If we can do it in a way that doesn't strengthen the religion, and, we're very much opposed to the faith-based initiative in funding religion. But I think that coalitions are great if you can find common cause.
I always get kind of irritated when some of our, even liberal politicians, and our president says, God bless America, after every talk. And the other kind of thing related to that, I just get, I don't understand how they can do that without violating the Constitution. And also, the other thing I guess I was thinking of is, in Congress and in our state legislature, we always open and close with a prayer, and I know you alluded to that, and I can't remember what you said, but I can't understand how that isn't unconstitutional.
Well, to your second, unfortunately, there's been 2 decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court on governmental prayer, both invoking the long-standing tradition of having chaplains open Congress with prayer. And so our current lawsuit, where Dan is the plaintiff, because of his being a former clergyman and having an ordination, we are trying to show the discrimination by suing the chaplain over not allowing him to give an invocation, which of course would be secular. But yeah, those court decisions, the Marsh decision from '83, I think it was, and the Greece decision 2 years ago, real bad for governmental prayer. So we fight it as we can. And your second point about God bless America, yes, we all hate that. We hate to hear it. And the song also is increasingly being used as if it's the national anthem. But of course, Irving Berlin was an atheist. He was not religious, who wrote God Bless America. He wrote it for a 1919, I think, musical, right, Dan? And then dusted it off for Kate Smith, when she was looking for something around before World War II. And his family very much opposed the idea of God Bless America replacing the national anthem, because that had been talked about. So it's just too bad he happened to do that theatrical number. But I think that there's free speech rights, and I think a politician, it's very bad taste for a politician to end a speech with God bless you or God bless America, but I think they have that free speech right. We have the right then to say, I don't think I like them very much, and I won't vote for them. But it's quite different when the government actively hosts, prayer and religion. But I think most of the rest of the world looks around at our politicians and their pandering piety and trying to say that this nation is favored by God, and they think we're very primitive and very childish. And I've even heard people from other countries tell me that. So it is just unfortunate, and we need to call them on it.
I think that any good that can be achieved using religion could be better done without it, because as soon as you introduce religion into a question, you've just left the logic of life and nature behind, and you're going off into the supernatural. Well, we better stick with reality, because once you leave reality, then you're free to go just anywhere. What do you think about that?
I agree with you, absolutely. You can speculate endlessly about the non-existent, and more people have been killed in the name of a God they can't prove exists than for any other reason, potentially.
For me, a joke I heard from a guest in my resort one time. I get people there from England and Germany and even Australia and New Zealand. It's kind of fun to meet people from around the world a little bit. And we were talking this origin of how we became a Christian nation that's instilled in 40 or 50% of the brains in our country, I guess. He said, well, when people started to leave Europe, you got the pilgrims and we got all the criminals. And he said, we won.
Yeah, Australia, yeah.
I have a comment too, or a question. But I didn't think about how to word this. But, there's the whole idea of promoting secularism in the sense of promoting atheism. I think people get those ideas mixed up. If you can be a Christian who doesn't believe in theocracy or thinks that we need to have a sort of secular approach. So I wish that more fundamentalists could accept the idea of secularism in our government as a way that, even prominent Christians, even Francis Schaeffer didn't think we should have any kind of theocracy. And there are many Christian thinkers who are against that, but I'm not sure. But it tends to spill over. The more Christians you have, it just kind of spills over into government. So I don't know, what do you think about promoting secularism?
Well, we have a bumper sticker, support the First Amendment or protect the First Amendment, it protects you. And theoretically, the separation between religion and government should unite everybody in America instead of dividing. It puts us all on equal footing. But I wish that we would see mainstream churches and religionists coming out and saying things in support of separation of state and church. They support it, but they are afraid to come out and say it. In 1960, when John Kennedy was running for president as a Catholic for the first time, he felt obliged to reassure the Protestants that he wasn't going to do what the Pope said, and he did that famous speech in Houston in 1960 where he said, I believe in an America where the separation of state and church is absolute. wonderful paragraph there. No politician today would say those words. We certainly lost a lot of ground, where somehow the idea of separation of state and church is almost like a dirty word, or you can't say it without getting criticized, and they're afraid of the religious right. But there's as many of us, if not more, non-religious as there are in the religious right today. I mean, the hardcore religious right is about 15%. So we just need to speak up, and speak up with a more powerful voice, demanding, that we go back to our secular roots, and showing public officials that we've got their back, I guess, if they support it.
I talked to somebody who believes we should have prayer in school, and I said, well, what if it's like a Mormon reading the prayer, and this was an evangelical? Then the light turns on, well, I'm not so sure about that. So I think that we should engage people in conversation about that as much as we can.
The group Americans United for Separation of Church and State, how savory is that organization? Have you worked?
Well, we have some lawsuits with them right now where Americans United took the Greece case. And so the first case that they are taking after the Greece case with the fallout on governmental prayer is a case that was brought about because of the Freedom from Religion Foundation and our chapter in the Florida area, where it's a situation where they allow rotating prayer, and anybody's been allowed to get up and do the prayer, but when an atheist wanted to give it an invocation, they were not allowed. So we're working with Americans United right now on that, and the ACLU, and our chapter, and the National FFRF. And so that's a closely watched case. And we worked with Americans United in another case in Michigan that we won, which was where there's a prayer booth in the atrium of the City Hall in Warren, Michigan. And our member, Doug Marshall's been complaining about it for years, and so have we, and we finally went to court over it. And now he gets to put up a reason station. And that was with their help. So, with staff attorneys, they're forging a lot of links with other legal groups around the country. So AU has certainly done amicus briefs for us, our case before the Supreme Court, and some other cases we've done amicus briefs for them. So we have a pretty good working relationship with them. I think that FFRF is more purist group because we don't have to satisfy the Baptists, American Baptists, who used to be the backbone of Americans United, so we have some of these cases against the IRS that I don't think Americans United would take. We're suing over the 990 form, we're suing over the housing allowance, where ministers are allowed to subtract from their taxable income the part of their salary that's paid by churches as a housing allowance. It's a huge benefit. It's not like it's tax deductible, it's actually subtracted. If they're paid $50,000 salary and $20,000 as a housing allowance, they're only being taxed on $30,000 or $40,000. So this is an unheard of benefit, and it was enacted in the 50s to reward clergy for fighting godlessness, which is hardly a secular purpose. So anyway, that's the kind of case that probably we're much more apt to take than they are. But they're larger and do very good work.
Hi. Thank you for coming. It's so great to have you here way in the back. I had a question. It's less about separation of church and state and more about functioning as an atheist in the world, I guess. So hopefully you can help. I hear a lot of Islamophobia, and I'm sure everyone does lately with the terrorist attacks and everything. How do you walk the line of supporting or standing against religion, but also against Islamophobia, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I kind of like Tazima Nasrin. Her word is Muslimphobia. She thinks we should be against Muslimphobia, but maybe it makes sense to have some fear of Islam. I mean, she's under death fatwa, she had to leave Bangladesh in the early 90s, and she's at the top of her hit list, and it's ruined her life. So, I think it makes sense for some people to be Islamophobic. I think that also we would feel, people who have been targeted are going to feel that way. So I kind of wish we would change the word to Muslimphobia, because it's really the individuals that we're supporting. But of course, the Freedom from Religion Foundation entirely supports the free exercise of religion. It's the twin part of the First Amendment, along with the Establishment Clause. And so we have spoken out against bans, these ridiculous ideas that you could ban people based on a religious test if they happen to be Muslim, for example. So, we often get criticized by social media, religious right social media, or religious right people contacting us and saying, how come you only fight Christianity? You must be for Sharia, as I said. There's this disconnect in their minds. But actually, because most of the violators of the Establishment Clause in this country are Christian, we usually are still dealing with Christianity in government and not the Muslim religion in government. We see a few complaints coming in that we can act on. But of course, we think it shouldn't matter what your views are. You're all should be equal citizens in this nation. But we certainly don't want some people's views to be inscribed in our government.
Okay, a couple more questions.
Recently, there's a continuing effort to use the media to support religion. There's been some apocalyptic or dystopian movies recently that feature rebuilding the society on the basis of the Bible. In your long-term strategy, are you thinking about any media movies or TV series or encouraging writers to develop that genre?
Well, the Freedom from Religion Foundation and Center for Inquiry did have a contest. That Funnier Than God or something like that, where we were encouraging script writers to come up with comedies that portrayed atheism in a good light. I know that Richard Dawkins has gone to Hollywood, along with Julie Sweeney, who used to be on Saturday Night Live talking with producers and writers there. I know that she's working on, she's got a movie that's not anything, she's working on a script that has nothing to do with atheism, but she's potentially interested in doing a TV series where she would be the star and she'd be the atheist mother. That's going to take a while for that happens, I think. So yeah, I think that's very important. Popular culture is very, very important. What we're working on at FFRF is we have a radio show, and now we're just finishing up our studio, and we're working on getting some quality television, TV series, Free Thought TV, where we interview freethinkers and non-fiction. But I think that there are actually a lot of really good movies out there that have got atheist protagonists, and we have come up with a list of them. We have it up at our website. If you go to the news link on our web page and go to Time and Topics, you can see a bunch of those movies that do portray atheists in a good light, or at least talk about us. So it's out there in the culture.
I'd like to add a fourth thing that non-believers, unfaithful people can do to help spread the word and identify themselves. And that is a basic cognitive tool of never referring to God in the singular. The brain that hears that word has that image in their head, and you are reinforcing it. You're saying you believe in God when you use the word God. You say it as your God, the God of this, or add a plural. I don't believe in your God or all the other gods. Always try to make it plural so that the brain that hears it doesn't reflexively just assume that's the God that's in their head. Because the notion that there's many gods is one of the primary arguments about why there's none. All right? So quit saying religion, say religions, and quit saying God without any pronoun or qualifier with it, so that it extrapolates to more than one image in the imagination of the brain you're addressing. And I would add that to the fourth thing. Wear the t-shirts, do it works.
I do try to do that a lot. I do want to say, since Dan was here last year, he has a new book that we have here called God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction. And that was a book that Richard Dawkins asked him to write because the most controversial sentence in The God Delusion is his sentence about God is the most unpleasant character in all fiction, and then there's like 13 adjectives, misogynistic, whatever, murderous, all this stuff. And he went to Dan and asked him to come up with, it was going to be just online with like a, what would you call it, like a spider, where with each adjective, Dan was going to come up with all of the citations in the Bible. And he came up with so many that Dawkins said, this is a book, and I'm going to help you write it, or help you publish it. And then he did write the foreword. And so in that case, we are talking about a very particular God.
I have a question regarding some of the experiences you had dealing with some of the schools. I assume the schools in Georgia were public schools.
Yeah.
Recently, we've had a new concept called charter schools. We've got parochial schools. We've got home schools. How about the funding for some of these things? Have we had any dealings with that? Most of the charter schools around the nation, 80+%, are religiously based. Certainly the homeschool programs tend to be mostly religiously based. We also have Catholic schools and Lutheran schools and Jewish schools, and now Muslim schools, which I suppose by definition are religiously based. Do you have any stories or contacts or experiences with these charter school, homeschool, parochial school programs? Obviously, if you're dealing with a little parochial school and they're praying at lunch, I suppose that's just as bad as praying in a parochial school, in a public school, sorry. Do you have any good stories like that?
Well, we complain a lot about, charter schools are very different than private schools. And this idea that 80% of charter schools are religious, I have not heard that statistic. I mean, that wouldn't really be lawful. Charter schools are public funded schools, and they're not supposed to promote religion. But yes, we have a lot of problems with charter schools. And in fact, last week we had a huge complaint go out that got a lot of coverage in Texas, where the guy who runs this school, and I'm going to forget his name, was bragging about how it was all just a stealth religious school, and it was all about Jesus. And this has been going on for 20 years in Texas, and so we hope that we will have a firm victory in stopping the funding of this school. And it's hard to believe it could go on that long. We have a complaint. Well, here, I don't know what the situation is in Minnesota, but in Wisconsin, of course, it was the first state to have voucher schools. And we're not going to take any credit for that. That was the ACLU's case. And they went to state court, and they should have gone to federal court, and we could have told them our state Supreme Court was dead when it comes to enforcing religious liberty. We have a Catholic elected Supreme Court. I don't know if it's elected here in Minnesota, but O'Connor is right. Justice O'Connor was going around the country saying, do not elect your state Supreme Courts. They're all terrible. So we got that voucher. We have the first voucher law passed and affirmed in the state of Wisconsin, and now the Supreme Court has had some bad decisions. And the law on schools is great in every respect, except for the decisions on vouchers and allowing voucher schools, and that's just going to potentially ruin our public schools. And so very hard to deal with, but we do have a complaint about a voucher school in Wisconsin where the law says you can't proselytize, you have to allow them to opt out of the religious instruction, which doesn't mean a lot because if you go to a Catholic school at public expense, it permeates every class, and even their mission statements will say that. But we got a school where they're not allowing the kids to opt out, so we have a major complaint about that, and potentially be a lawsuit. So yes, we watch those schools with an eagle eye, but in terms of homeschooling, there is a problem because a lot of public schools will pay for the curriculum that the parent chooses. We haven't gotten involved in anything like that yet, but it would be something that we would be very concerned about. Harder to fight because it's the parent's choice.
Referring back to the previous 2 or 3 questions and the replies, the thought occurred to me, are we having trouble with the word proselytize as applied to secularism? It's just a thought.
I don't know what that means.
I think you're saying that we are reluctant to put forward our beliefs.
Well, I realize one problem with proselytizing is you usually have to be convinced that you have the truth to be willing to go knock on somebody's door and tell them about that. And of course, I think secular humanists, we don't all think that we found the truth. We think that we have to search for it ongoing, but not necessarily that we found the truth. So it gets difficult to proselytize or to carry the good word out to others.
Well, I wouldn't like the word proselytize, but I think that non-believers should be more open and should be very proud that we have a respectable, very important tradition of upholding the Enlightenment, which is no small matter. And I think that we've been cowed and afraid to speak up, and sometimes we're just too polite. We think like we shouldn't bring up religion at a party. You say the word atheist and somebody gasps, you're afraid you're going to lose your business or whatever. So I am all for people being more forthright. Like if you sneeze and somebody says, God bless you, then maybe you should say, well, thank you, but that's a funny thing to say to an atheist. You never know what ripple effects you will have in speaking out. But we've always joked at the Freedom from Religion Foundation that we don't go knocking on doors and dragging people out of church pews and so on, like religions do. And, we've been more respectful. Most people come to free thought on their own, using their own mind. But maybe we need to give them a little more help.
I'm just going to take one more here.
Thank you. So one thing about the voucher schools is if we could make it that you have to opt in to the proselytization. I'm a little nervous, so I said it wrong, but versus having to opt out, instead of having the religion be the default that you are opting out of, maybe be able to opt in, so maybe some of that legal verbiage.
Tell that to our Wisconsin legislature, which is entirely Republican, both branches and the governors. We have a bad situation in Wisconsin, and we're not dealing with logic.
That was just an aside, my
Nice idea.
So, like you just said, we don't try to convert people, we try to educate people, and we're not going to be like yanking them around or pushing them around for more about persuasion and convincing through kindness and example and whatnot. But then, like with fighting for having a secular prayer versus a Christian prayer versus Islamic or so on in a public setting, or fighting how churches are tax-free by claiming to be a church ourselves, or like the marijuana church. While some of these might demonstrate the absurdity of having supporting one religion and not other stances, and broadening to include secular prayer or churches that aren't really churches or whatever, aren't we actually fighting to protect religion more so than if we were to actually say moving to no religious privileges? And I feel like whenever we talk about rights, we talk about freedom or non-discrimination because of race or gender or whatnot. I feel like defending everything important is already covered by everything else, even if you omit religion from the list of things that we need to be prepared for.
Well, first of all, I don't use the term atheist prayer or non-theistic prayer we're talking about invocation by itself doesn't have to mean religion. It means the opening remarks. It has been used as religion in Congress. So we hope that by having people asked to give an atheist or secular invocation before their city or county board, that it will create such cognitive dissonance, if not controversy, that they will drop it. And in fact, that has happened. And what else can we do? The law is simply not with us. But Kennedy, in writing the Greece decision, specifically stated that so long as a city council or county board that was holding opening prayers would not discriminate against an atheist, it was constitutional. Therefore, he gave us an opening to try to fight religions. It's not that we want to get up and espouse atheism at a city council meeting. It's that we're trying to show them how it feels. Some of the invocations that are given are just entirely secular. They're not pro-atheist or agnostic or anything. They're just talking about, they're a little lesson in our secular government. But some of them are very openly critical of religion, and so that creates controversy. And then the Christians see how it feels to have somebody opening a meeting with something that offends them. It's a way to teach them. It's the only avenue we have left. And I don't know about the marijuana churches. I would never do something like that. But the non-belief relief is not being set up like a church. We are setting it up as a 501c3 charity with very specific purposes. And we have we've done our application to the IRS, and we said, we're not going to file a 4990. We just want you to know that, because we feel we've been discriminated against because religious charities don't file them. We actually think we should be filing 4990. We think transparency is great. But we want to show that the law discriminates so that they will get rid of the law, so that churches do have to file 4990s. So we're not trying to be like the churches. We're trying to show that the law discriminates.
As a chapter of Freedom from Religion Foundation, it's nice to get more clarity on what you guys are doing. And we thank you for your work, and we thank you for your presentation today. Please thank Annie, Laurie.
Thank you for being so supportive.
Okay.